Yesterday afternoon, the film got finished before the book was finished. So I will read the last page of the second chapter of the book that we're reading, The Dutch House. Maeve has just been found to be very sick, and they're rushing her off to the hospital. Where was everyone then? Where did our father and Jocelyn go? Where was I? Sandy said she couldn't remember. Such a terrible time, she said, shaking her head. What was that he drove Maeve to the hospital and carried her into the lobby where some nurses took the sleeping child from his arms. She stayed in the hospital for 2 weeks. The doctors said the diabetes would have been brought on by trauma, or it could have been a virus. The body had all sorts of means to deal with it. Couldn't understand. In the hospital, Maeve swam in and out of consciousness while they worked to stabilize her blood sugar. Everything that happened was a dream. She told herself her mother wasn't allowed to visit. A punishment meted out to both of them for something she had done and couldn't quite remember. The Sisters of Mercy, all friends of her mother's, came to see her, and 2 girls from Sacred Heart presented her with a card signed by the entire class. But they weren't allowed to visit. Our father would retire signed by they got a card signed by the entire class, but they wouldn't allow to stay. And our father would come in the evenings, though he said very little. He would hold Maeve's foot through the white cotton blanket and tell her that she needed to get better now. No one was up for this. Jocelyn, Sandy, and Fluffy turned staying with her in the room. One of us for you, your brother, one for your father, Sandy said. Everyone's covered. Sandy said that to cry, she would wait until Maeve was asleep, and then she would go out in the hall. After we came home from the hospital, things got worse. Logic said our mother's absence had made her sick, and so logic concluded that further talk of our mother would kill her. The Dutch house was quiet. Sandy and Jocelyn and Fluffy devoted themselves to my sister, the needles, the insulin. They were terrified of the way every injection changed her, and our father would have nothing to do with it. Fluffy, who in those weeks slept in the bed with Maeve, ended up taking her back to the hospital in the middle of the night. Again, they worked to stabilize her. Again, they sent her home. Maeve would cry and cry until her father would come into her room and tell her to stop. They had all become characters in the worst part of a fairy tale. He was now 100 years old. Stop, he would say, as if he could only make the worst. You have to stop. And finally, she did. Chapter 3. Nearly 2 years into her irregular tenure, Andrea walked in the house Saturday after 2 small girls. Now, say what you will for Andrea. She had a knack for making the impossible seem natural. It wasn't clear about whether it was only Maeve and I who were meeting her daughters for the first time, or if the existence of Norma and Bright Smith was news to our father as well. No, he must have known. That he didn't look at them meant they were familiar. They were much younger than me. Bright, the smaller of the 2, looked like she should have been on a Christmas card. Fair like her mother with flushed cheeks and blue eyes, big smile for everyone. Norma had light brown hair and green eyes. She was no match for her shining sister, if only because she was so serious. Her lips stayed pressed together in a straight line. Clearly, it was Norma's job to look after things. Girls and mother said, "This is Danny, and this is his sister." Oh, we were shocked, of course. Our heart of hearts, too, certain that the Smith girls fell the end of Andrea for good. Well, I wasn't about to put up with 2 more children in the house, we hoped, especially not 2 girls. Who had been taking care of them all the Saturday nights that she'd come to dinner, never once mentioning she needed to get home. This would not be forgiven. When we stood at the door and said goodbye to the 3 of them after what had been a comparatively brief visit, we thought that we were saying goodbye for good. "Sayonara, Mrs. Smith," Maeve said that night in the bathroom as she put the toothpaste on my toothbrush and then hers. I was perfectly capable of handling a toothpaste, but this was our ritual. We brushed our teeth together, then said our prayers. "Buenas noches, Bright and Norma," I said. Maeve looked at me for a second, not believing I'd come up with that. Then she started laughing so hard she broke ill. Maeve and I were under the impression we were moments away from cracking the code on our life. And that's we would understand the impenetrable mystery that was our father. But we'd misread the appearance of Andrea's daughters completely. It was not some half-baked introduction. The final disclosure that Andrea came as a package deal was proof that she had fully assimilated, and we somehow had missed it. Soon the girls were regularly sitting with us at dinner table or taking off their socks to splash their feet in the swimming pool. Neither of them knew how to swim. It felt strange to have children around. Maeve and I both had friends at school, but their houses for parties and studying and sleepovers. No one ever came to Dutch House. Maybe because we didn't want to draw attention to our motherless state, or we feared the house would subject us to ridicule. But really, I think we understood that our father didn't like children, which is why it made no sense to let these two in. So one night the girls showed up with her mother, who was wearing a very fancy blue silk dress. Wright kept running her hands across the full skirt to make it rustle like blowing leaves, while Norma made a game out of trying to step only on the small black squares of marble on the foyer. Annie announced to the four of us that she and my father were going out in the evening. With no warning at all, she planned to leave the girls for Maeve and me to mine. What are we supposed to do with them, Maeve asked, because truly we didn't know. They weren't our responsibility. We'd never been alone with them before. Andrea waved her question away. She was ebullient in those days, as if everything had been decided. Maybe it had. You'll do nothing, she said to Maeve, and then gave a great smile to her girls. You take care of yourselves, don't you, girls? Do you have books, Irma? Ask Maeve to give her a book. Maeve had a stack of Henry James novels on her bedside table. The Turn of the Shrew. Was that what they wanted? Father came down the wide stairs in his best suit, eyes straight ahead. He was holding on to the bandage, which meant his knee was hurting him, which meant he was in a bad mood. But he didn't have a word for the rest of us, not a thank you or a goodbye. He went straight for the door. I think he was ashamed of himself. You be perfect, Andrea rang over her shoulder and followed our father out. He wasn't waiting for her. The two little girls looked stricken until they could no longer see the top of the mother's hair, and then they started to cry. Excuse me. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Maeve said, and went off to search Kleenex. In fairness to the girls, it was as if they were wailing. In fact, I think they were making their best effort not to cry, but it overtook them all the time. They sat down together in a single French chair. Her head on her sister's chest and buried her face in her hands like she just got news of the apocalypse. I asked them if they really wanted a hook, or if they wanted to watch television, or if they wanted to. They wouldn't look at me. But then Maeve came back, handed each of them a tissue, and speaking as if no one were crying at all, asked if they'd like to see the house. In their misery, it was clear that Norma Wright heard her. As crying was the direction the evening was headed in. But they stood less in order to listen. The foyer is not the house, Maeve said. It's just a little part of it. Now please notice that you can see all the way through it. Front yard, she pointed to the door where they'd come in, then turned in the opposite direction, pointed to the windows of the observatory. Backyard. Bright sat up to look in both directions, and when Norma leaked out the last of her tears, she gave a tentative glance as well. You see the dining room and the drawing room. Maeve turned to me. I think that's it, right? I don't think we've been in the kitchen. Why would you have been in the kitchen? I was trying not to be sullen. The girls were the ones who were sullen. But I could think of about 100 things I would have rather been doing with my evening than entertaining Andrea's children. Maeve went off to find a flashlight and then opened the door to the basement. Don't use the handrail, she said over her shoulder. You'll get splinters. Just pay attention and look at your feet. I don't want to go to the basement, Bright said, peering into the darkness from the top step. Don't, Maeve said. Won't be long. Carry me, Bright suggested. Maeve didn't even answer the one. Norma stopped 2 steps down. Are there spiders? Definitely, Maeve kept going. She was looking for this string that hung from the single light bulb in the middle of the ceiling. The girls considered their options up or down, and soon enough they followed her while I brought up the rear of the expedition. The girls were both in dresses, white tights, satin leather shoes. The front of the house was from another century. It bore no relationship to the structure that sat on top of it. In certain corners, the walls dissolved into piles of dirt. I had once found an arrowhead there. I would have dug around for more, but the truth was, I didn't like the basement myself. Why do you come down here? Norma asked, half in horror and half in wonder. I'll show you. Maeve then turned her flashlight to the far corner of the room until the beam bounced off a small metal door in the wall. That's the fuse box. Say a light burns out the whole powder room, and you'll notice tonight the light bulb. Then you have to come down here and check the fuse box. Sometimes, if you're out of fuses, it wouldn't work again. And heat goes out, you have to come down here to check the furnace. And if there's no hot water, you have to check the boiler. It could just be that the pilot light's blown out, and in that case, you've got to be careful lighting a match. There could be a gas light. Boom, she said. I had no idea. Maeve bravely ahead while Norma and Bright and I tried to stay in the general vicinity of her. She opened the wooden door that creaked so loudly the girls pressed against me for a moment. Then Maeve put another string, illuminated another bell that followed. This is the basement pantry where the extra food is kept, just in case you're here and get hungry. Sandy and Justin made pickles and jams and stewed tomatoes. Pretty much everything that goes in a jar. We looked up the shelves of immaculate jars, every one labeled with a date and organized by color. Golden peach hams floating in syrup, raspberry jam. There were crates of sweet potatoes and russets, onions on the cold. I had never exactly thought of being rich until then, seeing all that food stored away in the those little girls. Well, finally we were ready to go up again. Bright stopped and pointed to the boxes stacked beneath the stairs. What's in there? Maeve turned her flashlight to the musty tower of cardboard. Christmas ornaments and decorations, that sort of thing. Bright looked cheerful at the mention of Christmas and asked if she could open the boxes. Stood to reason that if there were ornaments, there would be presents, maybe even a present for her. But Maeve said, no, you can come back at Christmas, I'll open them up. I didn't say a word to Maeve that night. We brushed our teeth, and then when we had our prayers, I left her out. Come on, she said, don't be mad. But I was mad. I got into bed mad. The tour had occupied the whole evening. She had shown them everything there was to see. The butler's room where dishes were kept, the tablecloths were rolled into wide spools, the closet of the third floor bedroom with a tiny door in the back led to the attic crawl space. So she let them spin around in the ballroom, pretending to waltz. It never occurred to us to dance up there. Who puts the ballroom on the third floor? They asked. Maeve explained that when the house was built, a third floor ballroom was considered the height of fashion. A fad, really, she said, didn't last. But once you put a ballroom on the third floor, it's pretty much impossible to move it. Maeve showed them every possible bedroom in the house. Norma and Bright both agreed that Maeve's room was the best. They sat in the window seat while Maeve closed the draperies over them. And the girls squealed with laughter and called, no, don't, when she opened the draperies up again. When the tour was over, she brought a stepladder from the kitchen to take turns winding the grandfather clock, even though she knew I did that myself first thing Sunday morning. Sat beside the bed. Think of how overwhelming the house must be to them, how overwhelming we must be. So if I showed them everything, if just instead of these things, I don't know, friendlier? I was very friendly. I had a voice that was lovely. Maeve put her on my forehead the way she did when I was sick. Out there, little Daddy. I feel sorry for anyone who's that little. She put them in her own bed, and when our father came back with Andrea, they each carried one sleeping girl down the stairs and took them out to Andrea's car. Maeve had to run down the stairs after them. They had forgotten the girl's shoes. Maeve told me Andrea was a little bit drunk. To the long list of things my sister never got credit for, add this: she was good to those little girls. And if my father or Andrea was in the room, Maeve would politely ignore the children, but leave her alone with Norma and Bright. She was always doing something nice, teaching them to crochet, or let braid her hair, or showing them how to make tapioca. In return, it followed her through the house like a pair of worshipful Cocker Spaniels. When we ate dinner on any given night, it was dictated by a complicated set of household laws put in place by Sandy and Jocelyn. Now, if our father was home from work in time, the three of us ate in the dining room, Sandy serving us our plates while we breathed in the oily scent of furniture polish that hung in a fog over this massive table. But if our father stayed late or had other plans, Maeve and I ate in the kitchen. On those nights, Sandy put a plate of food in the refrigerator under a sheet of wax paper, and our father would eat it in the kitchen when he came home, or I assumed he had. Of course, when Andrea and the girls were there, we ate in the dining room. If Andrea was there, Sandy not only served our dinner, but she cleared the place as well. Whereas if Andrea wasn't there, we picked up our own meal, took it back to the kitchen. None of this had been explained to us, but we all understood, just as we understood on the Saturday night. Even my father and I would gather in the kitchen at 6 o'clock, Sunday supper that Sandy left for us the day before. Andrea and the girls never ate with us on Sunday night. Alone in the house, the three of us would crowd around the little kitchen table and have a sensation of something close to being a family, if only because we had pushed together in a small space. As big as the Dutch house was, the kitchen was oddly small. Sandy told me that was because the only people ever made to see the kitchen were the servants. And no one in the business of building grand estates ever gave a rat's hindquarters. That was a very Sandy thing to say, rat's hindquarters, if had the room to turn around. There was a little blue formica table in the corner where Jocelyn sat. She sat and shelled beans and rolled out pie dough on the same table where Sandy and Jocelyn took their lunch and dinner. Maeve was awfully careful to wipe the table down when we were finished and put everything back the way we found it, because she thought of the kitchen as belonging to Sandy and to Jocelyn. What little space there was mostly taken up by the huge gas range with 9 burners, a warming drawer, 2 ovens, each big enough to roast a turkey. The rest of the house was a polar ice cap in the winter, no matter how Sandy stoked fires. The stove kept the kitchen warm. Summers, of course, was a different story. But even in the summer, I preferred the kitchen. The door out to the pool was always open. There was a fan in the corner that blew around to smell whatever was baking. I could be floating on my back in the pool in the blinding midday sun, smell the cherry pudding. On the Sunday evening, after Andrea's daughters had been tucked in our laps, I was watching Maeve carefully, thinking that something about her was definitely off. I could read her blood sugar like the weather. I knew when she wasn't listening to me anymore, just about to keel over. I was the first one to notice when she was sweaty or pale. Sandy and Jocelyn could see it too. They knew when she needed juice and when to give the shots themselves. But it took our father by surprise every single time. He was always looking at the space just over Maeve's head. But in this case, it wasn't sugar at all. While I had my eye on her, Maeve did the most astonishing thing I had ever known her to do. Very casually, while spooning her potato salad, she told her father there wasn't any responsibility to take care of Andrea's children, or Andrea's daughters. He sat with this for a moment, chewing a bit of chicken he put in his mouth. Were you planning on doing something else last night? Homework, Maeve said. On a Saturday? Maeve was pretty enough and popular enough that she would never have to stay home on Saturday night. For the most part, she did. And the first time I realized it was because of me. She would never let me alone in that house. There was a lot of work this week. Well, my father said, looks like you managed. You can still do your homework with the girls in the house. I didn't get any homework done on Saturday. I was entertaining the girls. But your homework is now done, isn't it? You don't embarrass yourself in school tomorrow. That wasn't the point. My father crossed his knife and fork on his plate and looked at her. Then why don't you tell me the point? Maeve was ready for him. She thought all out in advance. Maybe she'd been thinking about it since I objected to the tour. They're Andrea's children, and she should take care of them, not me. My father tipped his head slightly towards me. You look after him. She looked after me morning, noon, and night. Was that what she was saying? She didn't have 2 more children to take care of? Danny's my brother. Those girls have nothing to do with us. Everything my father had ever told her, she was against him now. Maeve stood up. Maeve, look me in the eye. You want to ask me something. Maeve, you get your hands out of your hair. Maeve, speak up. Don't expect that anybody do you any favor of listening. If you don't, trouble yourself to use your voice. But if girls were your family, you wouldn't mind. He lit a cigarette with food still on his plate, an active, aggressive incivility. I'd never seen him before do that. Maeve just stared at him. I could hardly believe the way she held his gaze. They're not. He nodded his head. When you live under my roof and eat my food, I suppose you can trouble yourself to look after our guests when I am. Oh, coming from the drip, drip, drip. It made an unbelievable racket, echoing off the walls just like the Ritters when they complained about their own faucets. I had watched my father change enough washers to think I had no problem doing it myself. I wondered, were I to get up from the table and look for a wrench, if either of them would notice I was on? You didn't ask me, Maeve said. My father was pushing back his chair, but she beat him to it. She got up from the table, her napkin still tight in the fist, and left the room without asking to be excused. My father sat for a while in his customary silence and then put out his cigarette on his bread plate. He and I finished our meals, though I didn't know how I stood it. When we were done, he went to the library, stacked the dishes. He was going to watch the news, so I cleared the table, rinsed the dishes, and stacked them in the sink to wash in the morning. It was Maeve's job to clean up after dinner, but I did it. My father had forgotten about it. There were lemons, parts of shallow dish in the refrigerator, and I cut one for myself, got an orange for Maeve, and took them both upstairs on a single plate. She was in her room, sitting on the window seat with her long legs stretched out in front of her, with a book in her lap, but she wasn't reading it. She was looking out at the garden. The room was angled to the west, while not facing west directly, and the way the last bit of light fell over her, she looked like a painting. I handed her the orange. She dug in her nails to open it up. She bent her knees so I could sit down in front of her. This doesn't bode well for us, Daddy, she said. I might as well know that. End of chapter 3. My mouth, is it on? No. Oh,
The camera's on.
oh, is it?
We'll be back in a couple of minutes for chapter 4.
Chapter 4. 6 weeks after she left for her freshman year at Barnard, Maeve was summoned back to Elkins Park for the wedding. Our father met Andrea in the drawing room beneath the watching eyes of the Van Hoovicks. Bright dropped handfuls of pink rose petals on the Spanish Sonnerie rug, while Norma leaned against her mother and held 2 wedding bands on a pink velvet pillow. Maeve and I stood with 30 or so guests. That was when we learned that Andrea had a mother who sold insurance and a handful of friends who tipped back their heads to gape at the dining room ceiling while the cake was being served. The dining room ceiling was painted blue, deep and intense, and was covered in intricate configurations of carved leaves that had been gilded. The gilt leaves were arranged in flourishes, which were surrounded by circles of gilt leaves within squares of gilt leaves. The ceiling was in keeping with Versailles, then Eastern Pennsylvania. And when I was a child, I found it mortifying. Maeve and my father and I made a point of keeping our eyes on our plates during dinner. Sandy and Jocelyn served champagne at the reception, wearing matching black uniforms with white collars and cuffs Andrea had bought for the occasion. We looked like matrons at a woman's penitentiary, Jocelyn said, holding up her wrists. Maeve came back to the kitchen every time another bottle of champagne needed to be opened, because she announced with great bravado that popping corks was pretty much the first thing she learned to do in college. Champagne was just a loaded gun as far as Sandy and Jocelyn were concerned. The wedding was held on a fall day of such brightness that the light seemed to be coming not just from the sun, but from the grass and the leaves. All of the windows in the back of the house were triple hung and went to the floor. And for the occasion, my father took the trouble of opening the last with them, something I'd never seen done before. Opened, the windows made a dozen doors onto the back terrace, leading to the pool, which had been filled with lilies. Who knew that the water lilies could be rented for the day? Everyone was going on about how beautiful it all was, the house and the flowers and the light. Even the woman who played the piano in the observatory was beautiful. But Sandy and Jocelyn and I knew all of it was wasted. Our father couldn't marry Andrea at Immaculate Conception or ask Father Brewer to come to the house to marry because he was divorced and she wasn't Catholic, which made it seem like they weren't really getting married at all. The ceremony was performed by a judge that none of us knew, a man my father had paid to come to the house to do the job the way you'd pay an electrician. When it was over, Andrea kept holding up her glass to the light, remarking on how the champagne matched the color of her dress exactly. For the first time, I see how happy she was, how happy and young. My father was 49 on the day of his second wedding, and his new wife in her champagne satin was 31. Still, Maeve and I had no idea why he married her. Looking back, I have to say we lacked imagination. Do you think it's possible to ever see the past as it actually was? I asked my sister. We were sitting in her car parked in front of the Dutch house. Broad day early summer. Linden trees kept us from seeing anything except the linden trees. I had thought the trees were enormous when I was young, but they kept right on growing. Maybe one day they'd grow into the wall of Andrea's dreams. Those were rolled down and we each kept an arm out, Maeve's left, my right, while we smoked. I had finished my first year of medical school at Columbia. It would be the summer we would quit smoking, more or less, but on this particular day, we were still only thinking about it. I see the past as it actually was, maybe look at the trees. But we overlay the present onto the past. We look back through the lens of what we know now, so we're not seeing it as the people we were, we're seeing it as the people we are. And that means the past has been radically altered. Maeve took a drag off her cigarette and smiled. I love this. Is this what they're teaching you in school? Introduction to psychiatry. Tell me you're going to be a shrink. It would be so beneficial. Do you ever think about going to see a psychiatrist? This would have been 1971. Psychiatry was very much the rage. I don't need a psychiatrist because I can see the past clearly. But if you need to practice on someone, by all means, be my guest. My psyche is your psyche. Why aren't you at work today? Maeve looked completely surprised. What kind of stupid question is that? You just got here. I'm not going to work. Did you call in sick? I told Alderson you were coming home. He doesn't care when I'm there. I get everything done. She tapped her ashes out the window. Maeve had worked for a bookkeeper for Addison's ever since she graduated from college. They packaged and shipped frozen vegetables. My sister had won the math medal at Barnard. She had a higher cumulative GPA than the guy who won the math medal at Columbia that year. A sweet fact she learned from the guy's sister, who was also Maeve's friend. With all of her knowledge and ability, she not only managed the payroll and calculated the taxes, she improved the delivery system, ensuring that bags of frozen corn would be quickly ferried to the grocers' freezers throughout the Northeast. Are you always going to work there? You should go back to school. We're talking about the past, Doctor, not the future. You need to stay on point. I tapped at my cigarette. That was the past I wanted to. But Mrs. Bucksbaum came out of her house to check the mail and saw us sitting there. She came straight to my open window and leaned in. Danny, you're home, she said. How's Columbia? It's like it was before, only harder. I had gone to Columbia as an undergraduate also. Well, I know this one is happy to see you. She nodded her head to me. Hi, Mrs. Bucksbaum, Maeve said. Mrs. Bucksbaum put her hand on my arm. You need to find your boyfriend. There's got to be a doctor at the hospital who doesn't have time to look for a nice, tall doctor. My criteria go beyond height, Maeve said. Don't misunderstand me. I always love to see her back in the neighborhood, but still it worries me Mrs. Bucksbaum was speaking only to me, as if she and I were in our own private section of the car. She shouldn't just be sitting out here by herself. Some people might get the wrong impression. She's welcome, of course, I don't mean that. I know, I said. It worries me too. I'll talk to her. And this one across the street, Miss Bucksbaum gestured vaguely toward the linden trees with her forehead. Nothing. When she drives by, she does not wave. She does not acknowledge that anyone is here. I think she must be a very sad person. Or not, Maeve said. I see the girls sometimes. Do you see the girls? They have better manners. If you ask me, they're the ones to feel sorry for. I shook my head. We don't see them. Mrs. Buxbaum squeezed my forearm then and waved goodbye to Maeve. You can always come in the house, she said, and we thanked her as she walked away. Mrs. Buxbaum corroborates my memory of the past, Maeve said when we were alone again. After Andrea and the girls had moved into the Dutch house and Maeve was back at school, my father and I were closer. My care had always been my sister's responsibility, and now that she was gone, he took an unexpected interest in my schoolwork and my basketball games. No one thought that Maeve's role in my life was transferable to Andrea. The real question was to what extent I, at 11, was old enough to live an unsafe life. Sandy and Jocelyn did their part as always, keeping me fed and telling me what I was not allowed to go outside without a hat. They had antennae, both of them, for my loneliness. I could be doing homework in my room and Sandy would knock on the door. Come study downstairs, she'd say, then turn around without giving me the chance to answer. I would go, algebra book in hand. In the kitchen, Jocelyn would turn off her little radio and pull out a chair for me. Everybody thinks better around food. She sliced off the heel from a loaf of bread she'd made and buttered it for me. I've always been partial to the heel. We got a postcard from Maeve, Sandy said, and pointed to a card caught to the refrigerator with a magnet. The Barnard Library, covered with snow. The fact that the card was displayed was true proof that Andrea never went in the kitchen. She says we should keep feeding you. Jocelyn nodded. We hadn't planned to feed you once she left, but if Maeve says we have to, then we have to. Maeve wrote me long letters telling me about New York and her classes and her roommate, a girl named Leslie, who worked the dinner shift at the cafeteria every night as part of her financial aid package, and then fell asleep in her clothes while she tried to study in bed. Maeve gave no indication that school was difficult or that she was homesick, although she always said she missed me. Now that she wasn't around to help me with my homework, I wondered for the first time who had ever helped her when she was young. Fluffy? I doubted it. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my book. Andy looked over my shoulder. Let me see that. I used to be good in math. I've got it, I said. You only think you want to get rid of your sister, Jocelyn said, clapping her hand on my shoulder in a firm manner so as not to embarrass me. When she's gone, it turns out you miss her. Sandy laughed and swatted Jocelyn with a dish towel. She was only right about half of it. I had never wanted to get rid of Maeve. Do you have a sister? I asked Jocelyn. Sandy and Jocelyn had both been laughing, and then at the same time they stopped. Are you kidding me? Jocelyn said. I don't think so, I said, wondering what if funny and then not funny. But in the second before they could correct me, I saw it. The similarity in these two women I had known before knowing. Sandy cocked her head. Danny, seriously? You didn't know we were sisters? In that moment, I could have told them all the ways they fit each other and all the ways they looked like, but it wouldn't have mattered. I had never wondered who they were related to or who they were to. All I knew was that they cared for us. I remembered Sandy being gone for 2 weeks when her husband was sick, and again for a few days after he died. I didn't know. That's because I'm so much prettier, Jocelyn said. She was trying to let me off the hook, but I couldn't see that one was prettier than the other. They were younger than my father and older than Andrea, but I couldn't narrow it down any further than that. I knew not to ask. Jocelyn was taller and thinner, her hair an unnatural shade of blonde, whereas Sandy, whose thick brown hair was always held back with 2 barrettes, maybe had the nicer face. Her cheeks were pink, and she had very pretty eyebrows, if such a thing were even possible. I didn't know. Jocelyn was married, Sandy a widow. Both of them had children. I knew that because Maeve gave them whatever clothes we had outgrown. I knew that because when one of the children was really sick, they didn't come to work. Did I ask them when they came back who was sick? Is she better now? I did not. I liked them both so much, Sandy and Jocelyn. I felt terrible for failing them. Sandy shook her head. Boys, she said, and with that single word excused me from all responsibility. There was a phone at the front desk of the dorm where Maeve lived. I had the number memorized. If I called her, some girl would be dispatched to the 3rd floor to knock on her door and see if she was in, which she usually wasn't because Maeve liked to study at the library. That whole transaction to find out she wasn't there and then leave a message took at least 7 months, approximately 4 minutes longer than my father thought a long-distance call should last. So while I was desperate to talk to my sister and ask her if she knew, and if she did not know, then ask her how she neglected to tell me, I didn't call. I went into the drawing room where I stood in front of her portrait, cursing quietly to myself under her benevolent 10-year-old gaze. I resolved to wait till Saturday and ask my father instead. With every passing day, the similarities between Sandy and Jocelyn became glaringly obvious. I saw it every morning as they stood side by side in the kitchen when I left to catch the school bus. I saw it in the way they waved, like a couple of synchronized swimmers. And of course, they had exactly the same voice. I realized that I had never known which one of them was calling for me when I was upstairs. What could have been wrong with me that I'd missed all that? What difference does it make, my father said, when finally it was Saturday and we were off to collect the rent. But you knew. Of course I knew. I hired them, or your mother hired them. Your mother was always hiring people. First there was Sandy, and then a couple of weeks later Sandy said that her sister needed a job, so we wound up with the pair. You've always been perfectly nice to them. I do not see the problem. The problem, I wanted to say, was that I was asleep to the world. Even in my own house, I had no idea what was going on. My mother hired them because she knew they were sisters, meaning she was a good person. I didn't even know they were sisters, meaning I was a toad. I'd begun to say why I was so upset. For weeks, I tried to avoid Sandy and Jocelyn whenever I could, but that was impossible. Finally, I resolved to believe that I had always known who they were to each other and that I had forgotten. Sandy and Jocelyn had always run the house with complete autonomy. Maybe on occasion we would tell them how nice it would be to have beef stew with dumplings again, or that wonderful apple cake, but even that was rare. They knew what we liked, and they gave it to us without our needing to ask. We never ran out of apples or crackers. There were always stamps in the left-hand drawer of the library desk, clean towels in the bathroom. Sandy ironed not only our clothes, but our sheets and our pillowcases. There was always a bright row of silver-topped insulin bottles that shivered on the refrigerator door whenever Maeve was home. They sterilized syringes back in the day before they were disposable. They would never tell them the laundry needed, we would never tell them the laundry needed doing or a floor needed cleaning, because everything was done before we had a chance to notice. All of that changed after Andrea arrived. She made weekly menus for Jocelyn to follow and gave her opinion on every course. There wasn't enough salt in the soup. She had given the girls too many mashed potatoes. How could they be expected to eat so many mashed potatoes? Why was Jocelyn serving cod when Andrea had specifically told her sole? Could she not have troubled herself to check another market? Did Andrea have to do everything? Every day she worked to find something extra for Sandy to do. Dusting the shelves in the pantry, washing the curtain shears. I no longer heard Sandy and John talking to each other in the halls. I no longer heard Jocelyn's spectacular whistling when she arrived at the house in the morning. They were no longer allowed to call up the stairs to ask a question. They were to walk up and find us like civilized people. That's what I said. Sandy and Jocelyn made it a point to be less visible, more civilized, to work wherever we were not. Or maybe that was me. My bedroom more after Maeve left. There were 6 bedrooms on the second floor of the house. My father's room, mine, Maeve's, a sunny room with twin beds where Bright and Norma slept. A room for the guests we never had. A guest room, which had been made into a household office. There was also a sort of sitting area at the top of the stairs where no one had ever sat until Norma and Bright showed up. They seemed to love to sit at the stairs. Andrea announced her plans for the reconfiguration one night at dinner. "I'm going to move into the room with the window seat," she said. My father and I could only look at her, while Sandy, who was refilling the water glasses, took a step back from the table. Andrea, nothing. Norma's the oldest girl now. That's the room for the biggest girl. Norma's mouth opened a bit. I could see that all of this was news to her. If she wanted to be in Maeve's room, it was because she wanted to be with Maeve. "Maeve's coming home again," my father said. "She's only gone to New York. And when she comes back to visit, she'll have a beautiful room on the 3rd floor. Sandy will see to that, won't you, Sandy?" But Sandy didn't answer. She held the water pitcher to her chest as if to keep herself from throwing it. "I don't think we need to do this now," my father said. "There's no shortage of places to sleep around here. Norma can have the guest room if she wants it. The guest room is for her guests. Norma will sleep in the window seat. It's the nicest bedroom in the house, the nicest view. silly to hold it as a shrine for someone who doesn't live here. Honestly, I thought that maybe we should take the room ourselves, but the closet isn't very big. Norma has such little dresses. The closet will be fine for you, won't it? Norma nodded slowly, both horrified by her mother and mesmerized by the thought of that window seat, those wonderful drapes that could close a person off from everything. I want to sleep in Maeve's room, Bright said. Bright hadn't adjusted to living in so much space, and she clung to her sister the way I had clung to mine. You'll each have your own room, and Norma will let you visit, her mother said. Everyone will adjust just fine. It's like your father said. This house is big enough for everyone to have her own room. And with that, the matter was closed. I never said a thing. I looked at my father, who was apparently now the father of Norma and Bright as well, hoping he would give it another shot, but he let it go. Andrea was a very pretty woman. He could give her her way now, or he could wait and give her her way later, but either way, she was going to get what she wanted. All of this happened about the time I'd fallen in love with one of the Van Hoobeck daughters, or rather, their portrait, which I called Julia. Julia had narrow shoulders, yellow hair, held back by a green ribbon. Her portrait hung in a bedroom on the 3rd floor of the Dutch house, above a bed no one ever slept in. With the exception of Sandy, who ran the vacuum and wiped things down with a dust rag on Thursdays, no one but me set foot up there. I believed that Julia and I were true lovers, thwarted by the misalignment of our births. I worked myself into such a state over the injustice of it all that I once made the error of calling my sister Barnard to ask if she had ever wondered about the girl whose painting hung in the 3rd floor bedroom, the girl with the gray-green eyes who was one of the Van Hoobeck's daughters. A daughter, Maeve said. I was lucky I caught her on the phone. They didn't have any daughters. I think that's Mrs. Van Hoobeck when she was a girl. Take the painting downstairs and look at them together. I think they're both her. My sister was fully capable of teasing me while I could have bled from my ears, but just as often she spoke as if we were equals, giving me an honest answer to any question. I could tell by her voice she wasn't joking, or even particularly paying attention to what I had asked. I ran up the turning staircase to the 3rd floor and stood on the unused bed to lift the carved frame of my beloved off the wall. The frame was grander than what she would have wanted, and not as grand as it deserved. My Julia was not Mrs. Van Hoobeck. When I carried the painting downstairs to lean it on the mantelpiece, it was clear that Maeve was right. They were paintings of the same woman seated at either end of her life. Old Mrs. Van Hoobeck with the black silk buttons marched to her neck, and young Julia caught in a breeze. And really, even if it wasn't the same woman, such a likeness made it clear how one day the daughter would become a mother. Then Jocelyn came around the corner and caught me standing there, looking at the two paintings together. She shook her head. "Time flies," she said. Sandy and Jocelyn moved Maeve's things up to the third floor. At least the room faced the back garden like her old room did. At least the view would be more or less the same, and arguably even better. Fewer branches, more leaves. But the windows were dormers, of course, and there was no window seat. The new room was also a fraction of the size, and under the eaves, so the ceiling sloped. As tall as Maeve was, she'd be hitting her head every other minute. The whole depressing enterprise of turning Maeve's room into Norma's room took longer than anyone could have imagined. Since once Maeve's things were out, Andrea wanted the place painted. And after it was painted, she changed her mind and started bringing home books of wallpaper. She shopped for a new bedspread, a new rug. For a couple of weeks, the redecoration was all anyone heard about. But it wasn't until Maeve came home for Thanksgiving that I realized none of us had been brave enough to inform my sister of her exile. Surely that was my father's job. Surely the rest of us would have known that he would never do it. Maeve was in the foyer, swinging me around, kissing Sandy and Jocelyn, kissing the little girls, and suddenly we all understood that she was about to go upstairs and find a raft of dolls spread across what had been her bed. In that moment, it was Andrea, is the general, who showed presence of mind. Maeve, we've changed some things around since you've been gone. You're on the third floor. It's very nice. The attic, Maeve said. The third floor, Andrea repeated. My father picked up her suitcase. He had nothing to say on the subject, but at least he was willing to go up there with her. What with his knee that bothered him on stairs, our father never went to the third floor. Maeve still had her red coat on. She was wearing gloves. She laughed. It's just like the little princess, she said. The girl loses all of her money, so they put her in the attic and make her clean the fireplaces. She turned to Norma. No big ideas for you, miss. Will not be cleaning your fireplace. Still my job, Sandy said. I hadn't heard Sandy get in on a joke once. If there was, in fact, anything funny about Maeve moving to the third floor. Well, let's go then, Maeve said to our father. Long hike. We should get started if we're going to make it back in time for supper. Something smells good. She looked at Bright. Is it you? Bright laughed. But then Norma ran out of the room in tears, understanding what taking Maeve's room might mean to Maeve. Maeve watched her go. And I could see on her face she wasn't sure who she should be comforting. Norma? Sandy? Me? Our had her bag and was already heading up. After a moment's hesitation, followed him. In truth, they were gone for a very long time, and no one went up to the third floor to rush them, to tell them that dinner was on the table and we were waiting. It's the end of chapter 4.